Sure.
Just, I don't know, it might be interesting to
Okay.
see if you can understand what we're going.
All right. Well, it's 1:40, so we're gonna get started. Oh, I don't like that, but I'll get used to it. My name is Corey Haubecker. I'm with Post Architecture, based out of Portland, Oregon. I'm a principal and sustainability director there. And here we have Maggie.
Yeah, I'm Maggie Harris, and I'm a senior associate working with Corey at Holst. And I'm also working on a PhD at Portland State University focused on community health and housing. And I'm also an appointed member of the Oregon Housing Stability Council, which is the advisory group for the Oregon Housing Finance Agency.
Out of curiosity, are there any other architects in the room? Nice. Good on you. Developers? Affordable housing folks? Good. That's a great mix. Well, if you could advance, I guess, bring up the slide. Who are we? Holst Architecture, as I mentioned, we're about a 50-person firm based out of Portland, Oregon. We do a large part of our work in Oregon, but have an office in Minneapolis now to serve places further east. We've done work in Idaho, Washington, kind of all over the Pacific Northwest. We here are kind of a sampling of some of our multifamily projects on the screen, but we do all kinds of work, performing arts centers, libraries. We've been getting into substance abuse treatment facilities, a lot of social impact work, what we call social impact work, things like homeless services and things like that. But I would say probably for the last decade, 12, maybe even 15 years, housing, both market rate and more affordable housing has been kind of our bread and butter. And so I think we've done kind of run the gamut in terms of typologies, from really small projects. We have a modular project, which is sort of the bottom center there, 5 over whatever, type 1 construction. We've done a lot of that. We've got a mass timber high rise under construction in Portland right now. So really kind of a full range and breadth of different housing types that we've worked on. Next slide, please. So this slide, I just want to talk a little bit about our philosophy. I think we're probably not unique in this, but we have sort of design principles that we stand by. And I think what we get excited about is how we apply those design principles across the gamut of our work, whether it's really high-end, expensive, performing arts center type work, or really the most humble, affordable housing project. We don't really treat them differently in terms of the attention and care that we pay towards really good design. So some of the design principles here I wanted to talk about, and I'm not going to talk about them exactly in order, but the first one in the upper left there, worth and value, actually really echoes some of the things we heard in the keynotes today, that everybody has an intrinsic, inherent worth and value, and what we do as architects really needs to acknowledge that and respect that, and we carry that through the whole design. In the upper right is activated and welcoming. I don't think that's at all controversial, but we're trying to design spaces that are that feel good to be in, that humans like to be in. One of our taglines or catchphrases is that we design buildings that people love. So that we take that very seriously. The next one I want to talk about is housing as healthcare. It's research shows that folks who have housing instability or suffer from houselessness, like physically, their physiological health suffers as a result of that. And so getting them in stable housing can help improve their health outcomes and really build a solid foundation on which they can improve their health, improve their financial stability, and really set them on the path for success. The next item was inclusive design. There's a DEI component to that, but there's also a tie-in to trauma-informed design. As we've been doing more substance abuse work, we've really learned a lot about trauma-informed care, that those folks apply to what they do, and learned a lot of lessons about how there's a strong overlap with what we do. And so the trauma-informed design components of our work really have filtered through essentially all of our work. It's not just the affordable housing, but and obviously the substance abuse stuff, but kind of all of our social impact work has a really strong trauma-informed design bent, particularly as our affordable work becomes more and more permanent supportive housing. We're doing a lot of that lately. Trauma-informed components to that are really important. So components of that include safety, both actual safety, which is not negotiable, but perceived safety. Creating spaces that people walk into and feel like they know where the doors are and they can kind of feel safe and understand how the space lays out. Another principle is de-escalation, so giving people opportunities to escape a stressor, so they have options and choices and outlets to move to. Biophilia and connections to nature are really important. So views, access to fresh air, even the colors of the room, all those kinds of things play into making people feel at home, and that kind of relates to the activated and welcoming component as well. And then the last one I want to talk about, and it sort of relates directly to what we're talking about today, which is community connection. So as architects, it's incumbent upon us to, design buildings that establish a basis for which community can grow. And we can help jumpstart that process early on by doing early engagement with the community. That's kind of challenging to do because there's never funding for that, and oftentimes the schedule doesn't allow, but we're really pushing to have more engagement at the front end of the design process. But now this post-occupancy evaluation is our effort to do some of that engagement on the back end. So find out after the building's built how it's operating, how it's functioning, and how it's supporting that community development. I think that's next up is Maggie. Next slide.
All right, so Corey touched on this a bit already, but why post-occupancy evaluations? And Corey just also presented the Holst principles that guide our design process, but we wanted to actually figure out if our intended experience aligns with the actual resident experience. And the most effective way we think to do that is through post-occupancy evaluations. And the primary objective of this study, or the studies that we're doing, is to understand how the built environment influences the health and well-being of building users. And as Corey mentioned, I agree that post-occupancy evaluations seem to be the missing phase in the design and development process. And we need to start thinking in terms of, we built this building, now what? And challenge really our standard business as usual approach to design and development. All right, so I wanted to take just a moment to speak to some of the research drivers behind our post-occupancy evaluations, or POEs. And I'm certain that everybody in this room is very aware of these statistics, and that we are facing the worst affordable rental housing crisis in decades. And this results in multiple forms of housing insecurity, including poor housing conditions. And according to the Healthy Homes program, substandard housing is more likely to contain environmental hazards, and residents of those properties are less likely to have the resources to report or remediate those problems. So doing POEs are a pivotal part of the process that allow the resident voices to really be heard and bring to surface issues that outsiders or non-residents most likely don't see or know. The next bit I wanted to acknowledge was housing is identified as a major social determinant of health, and those less familiar with this term, social determinants of health are non-medical factors that influence health outcomes. And so our goal with POEs is to help inform spaces to better foster occupants' health, healing, and well-being. And lastly, we also want to acknowledge that housing instability can be directly linked to toxic stressors for individuals. So I'm sure you all are familiar with the quote, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us," and by Winston Churchill. And stressful or unpleasant living conditions can contribute to both adverse mental and physical effects of residents. So all of the previous slides are deeply rooted in academic research. So it's important to highlight some similar ideas that were echoed by resident services staff that are actually in the field. And these are some example sentiments that they expressed when we met with them to pitch this idea of a post-occupancy evaluation. All right, so how do we do it? This is a diagram showing our research approach for post-occupancy evaluations. And really we start with identifying our research goals or objectives. And then we had to figure out what methods we wanted to use to collect data. And then from there, it all leads to our end goal of a final report that we not only share with our colleagues and the client team, but also the housing industry as a whole to pass along any lessons learned. All right, so I don't expect you to be able to read any of that, but this is just an example of a office-wide brainstorming session we did to kick off this process. And we're all a bunch of designers and very curious and want to figure out hear all the feedback about any tiny detail of the building. And so these were question brainstorms that our colleagues had about what they would be interested in achieving or learning from the POE. But we really needed to distill down our focus, and we approach POEs with a mixed method approach. So that's combining quantitative data with qualitative data. And for the POE case study that Corey is about to talk about, it's very qualitative focused. And we feel this is might be the most important part of POEs because it's really about elevating the residents' voices and creating a narrative of the resident stories. And then the quantitative data can help support or explain any anomalies in what we heard from the residents themselves. All right, so here's another table or diagram showing our overall research design for our first post-occupancy evaluation. And as mentioned, there's the quantitative conditions that we studied, and so the indoor environmental quality, and then also the qualitative. So it's really focused on the actual resident experience that influences their overall well-being. And we did this through a resident survey, a resident-centered focus group, a building operator workshop, so that's talking with the on-site staff about the building, and then site walkthroughs with photo documentation. And we'll talk about the other methods that aren't highlighted later on in the presentation.
So the project that we studied is 72 Foster. It's in the southeast quadrant of Portland, Oregon, and its name comes from being on the intersection of 72nd and Foster. Very creative name. But you can see some of the key stats here, or maybe you can't if you're in the back. So maybe I'll read off some of them. But it's income restricted and completed in 2019, about 80,000 square feet and 101 units. The units, the genesis of the project was that, actually I should mention, the owner and developer is Reach Community Development out of Portland, who we've worked with a number of times. They're really a great client. And they approached this with a need for multifamily and multi-generational housing in Southeast Portland. And the reason we picked this project was that it was recent, but not too recent. So, it had been in operation or occupied for about 5 years at that point. So enough time, enough miles on the odometer to, for things to break and for things to, figure out what works and what doesn't. It was also a project that was in living memory in the office. So we knew why some of the design decisions were made. I've worked on some of the schematic design for this. Other people in the office who brought it to fruition are still around. So it's important to kind of have that. The other component of this that was really important was that Reach as an organization was really bought in on this. It was I guess when we started out, I didn't think much of it, but it was a significant investment in their time. Their staff had to help us out a lot in terms of making connections with their residents, and just dedicating time to talking to us about their experiences there as well. So the fact that they were able to give us that time, and also not be afraid to find out things aren't going well, to be honest about what's happening there, was really important as well. So their buy-in was critical. Next slide. Yeah.
What's the unit mix?
Oh, I think there's a slide here that covers it, but there's, well, I'll cover it when we get to it. Yeah. Yeah, so here just some context photos of this space, and you can kind of see this is a view from the main road, Foster Road. There's a community center, community room on the ground floor, and then upper right is a lobby. And it's going to be a little challenging for those of you in the back, but I'll try to talk it through. I just want to lay out the context of the building, because some of the stuff we're going to talk about later I think is a little relevant to how the building is designed. North in this plan is sort of diagonally up to the left. I had to rotate it. But Foster Road is across the top of the page and 72nd's on the right. And there's a cul-de-sac, an existing cul-de-sac there. That really was like a community center for the neighborhood that was already there. They used, kids played there, and it was really, because there's no traffic, it was just a place that people hung out. This had been, an empty lot essentially. And so in the design process, from an urbanistic point of view, we're holding that street edge and holding that corner, but it gave us this opportunity to build off of that cul-de-sac, that community outdoor area, and expand that with a courtyard space. There's also, of note, across the page to the right is the Portland Mercado, which is like an outdoor food vendor market, which sadly had a fire last year, so it's not right now in operation, but a very popular place to be. And so that connection from that courtyard space to the Mercado was very important, which was a little bit forced on us because there's an easement, there's a utility easement through there, but we really tried to play that up, and there's the image sort of on the third from the left on the bottom there is a view of that portal that connects those two outdoor spaces. So the last thing I'll say about the ground floor plan is all along the street frontage is retail space, leasable retail space. At the knuckle between the two legs is the resident lobby and two elevators. You'll note that there's elevators there, but no stair at the lobby, which will come up later. The stairs are at the ends of the L's. And then along the courtyard side is a bike storage room and a big community room and some space for staff. And then the trash room is in the bottom, like the bottom of the short leg, which also will come up later. This is the fourth floor plan. So it's a 4-story building. It's a type 1 podium with 3 stories of wood framed housing above. And that was really just limited by the zoning in that area, limits, I think, to 75 feet. So we're kind of capped out on how tall we can be there. Here's the unit mix, where it's 66 studios, 14 one-bedrooms, 12 two-bedrooms, and 9 three-bedrooms. So a little heavier than normal for us on the larger units, but again, they wanted to encourage multi-generational housing. So big dogleg corridor with the elevator sort of at that knuckle with some bike parking and laundry. The trash room is again at the bottom right, and there's only one of those because that's where the stacks above the trash pickup on the ground floor. There is on the 4th floor only there, you kind of see there, but there's a lounge for community space with a balcony that overlooks to the east, so you can see Mount Hood. It's really, really lovely. The photo of that is sort of second from the left there. So we started this process with interviews with staff. So we were put in touch. Oh, sorry, the text got a little messed up here, but the community manager, the resident services coordinator, and the maintenance technician. So it's really important. It was really valuable to meet with them first, I think, because it kind of gave us a context of what they see happening in the building, both pro and con, and really helped us craft what Maggie's going to talk about a little bit more later, which is the questions to the residents and the structure of how we engage with them. I mentioned earlier about the time commitment, especially the resident services coordinator, Peggy. She spent tons of time with us, and it was really critical like what our lessons, one of our lessons learned was find a Peggy for each one of these. A little bit about the demographics of the folks that we ended up who ended up responding to the surveys. This first slide here is age, ethnicity, and gender. So I would say there's a good mix of all of that. I think that in terms of Portland demographics, we're a little more diverse, more represented than Portland overall. But overall, I think a good mix of people engaged with our survey. We didn't just only get young people or only old people. It was kind of everybody across the board, which is encouraging. And then on the next slide is use of mobility equipment, occupation, and time living at 72 Foster. And I think the time there is really instructive. Like I mentioned, it had been open for like 5 years, and we got 28% of the occupants had been there basically since it had opened. They don't have a lot of turnover there because people really like living there. And Reach also provides services to help keep them in their housing if they're struggling. They connect them with services so they can keep staying there. So yeah, a lot of people have been there a long time. So that was good feedback that way. And this is just a quote from one of the focus group participants. I think it says, I just want to thank you for letting me voice my opinions. I certainly don't have the right answers, but I hope that I gave you a little input as to how my experience is here. And I was reminded of this, and that's a quote you'll see later with the presentations today with the keynotes, where they both really talked about like how people who are kind of at the margins of society feel invisible. So us being able to engage with them, we heard repeatedly that they really appreciated the opportunity to talk to us about it.
Thanks, Corey. And as mentioned, some of the slide graphics are a little jumbled, so if anything looks unclear, just shout out and we can try to clarify for you. All right, so these are the key findings from the engagement. We have many more, but these are some that we wanted to highlight. So this is overall satisfaction with the building, and specifically in the common areas. So as you can see, nobody really thinks it's the worst. Nobody really thinks it's the best. It's above average, I would say. And then that's similar to the satisfaction with the units. But the data gets a bit more interesting once we actually dive in. Okay. Well, let's see if I could, if I memorize these. Okay, so these again talk about the overall reactions from the residents in the focus groups. Sentiments were voiced about, I hit a gold mine, I'm so happy, it's like a 5-star hotel. And then some of them mentioned that there's often celebration events like weddings in the community room and courtyard area, which I thought was really special to hear as well. And then getting into one of the themes we focused on, which is comfort. So as you can see, the comfort in units, which is the top row, is very similar to the comfort in community spaces. Although the temperature, there's more horribles and poors ratings for the units temperature, and that's because there's no AC in the units. There is AC in the common areas and corridors. Wanted to point that out because it'll come up again. And okay, well, some mentions of, I like the natural light. There's a lot of complaints about smoking in the courtyard. And then a lot of people expressing that they wish there was central air. And I think the last comment is about smells from the corridor vents that we also heard a lot about. And then this was the feedback from the building staff interviews, and this quote really stood out to all of us, where the resident services coordinator said that during the heat waves, she basically goes up and down the corridors doing wellness checks and making sure all the residents have their doors open, and to ensure that some cool air is coming in from the corridors or borrowed from the corridors. So that really stuck out to us. And then also some notes about this beautiful community room that it seems like all the residents enjoy, but again, some of them think that it is a greenhouse like space. And so considerations, thinking about a simple shade solution could fix this. And then for safety, another thing that we focused on, we asked what areas of the building do you feel safe in? And so it seems like everybody feels safe and secure in their units and the primary community or gathering spaces. However, some of the more hidden spaces like the trash room or surrounding the building or the bike room as well, there's a lot of safety concerns expressed for those areas. And okay, the bike parking was echoed here about feeling not feeling safe or secure, and they really residents no longer use one of the bike storage spaces that you access from the exterior of the building. And there's some concerns with there not being a stairwell in the lobby. Some people mentioned, or a lot of them mentioned actually, that they're grateful that there's two separate entrances for the building lobby space, because oftentimes people who are not residents or guests of residents are waiting to come in, kind of piggyback in from the entrances. But then, of course, others said it's safe, I feel like home. So we wanted to also note, or I think it's important to note, that the safety issues, from what we found, is not a direct reflection of failure on Reach's part or the building operators team. I think that we see a lot of these themes throughout Portland, but it really surfaces kind of things that we should be keeping top of mind when we are going through the design process, such as access control and making that primary or focus conversations with the building operator team. And then again, these are just some concerns expressed or feedback from the building staff. You can see that some of the locks have been tampered with on the exterior doors. There's this beautiful bench out front, but they said no one really uses it because it's kind of hidden. And then Corey was talking about this breezeway that goes through the building, and there's a lot of concerns with people taking their vehicles or motorcycles through there as well. All right, Corey?
Yeah, so this graph describes what people responded as spaces that they use in the building. No surprise, almost everybody's using their unit. Lobby, mailroom, laundry rooms, community room, they're all very popular. Retail spaces, surprisingly, half of the residents were using those. There's a pizza shop and a game store and like a boba tea space down there. So very popular amongst the residents to use those spaces. The outdoor space, a little less than half. Disappointingly, the fourth floor lounge and balcony, which were kind of key in the design process, creating that spot, because we knew there was like this beautiful view to the mountains to the east. We spent a lot of effort to like craft that space. Not a lot of people are using it, and I think part of it is, the survey period was over the pandemic and maybe people weren't using that community space. However, the one on the ground floor, 60% of people were using. So it could be that it was on the fourth floor and kind of hidden and unknown. And also there was, I think, some issues with folks misusing the space, and so perhaps some folks just avoided it as a result. And the bike room is down there at the bottom at only 12%. That could be people who are just not using bikes, but also there's been a lot of break-ins in bike rooms, so perhaps people are avoiding it as a result. Oh boy. Yeah, so I didn't memorize these, but I think the takeaway that one of the biggest takeaways, because I was involved in the early design phases, I didn't carry through on the project team, but the issue with the stair and the elevator. There are 2 elevators for just a 4-story building, which we felt pretty good about, but the elevators break down often. Sometimes the power goes out. And because of the way this building is configured and the way that access control works, it means that sometimes it's hard to get upstairs. And so I think one of the lessons learned, and I didn't mention this before, but one of the other reasons we looked at this building was we're doing another project for the same client just a block away. early on in the design process, we had identified that as, a miss in this project, and we're not going to do that again. And so in the subsequent future project, there's only one elevator, but there's a stair right there. So access upstairs should not be as much an issue.
Or is that building as big? Is it still 100 units or is it smaller?
That one is 64 units. That has 20 permanent supportive housing units, like a less dense mix, so fewer 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms. We don't need 2 elevators. We didn't, like on paper, we didn't really need them here either because it's short, but the reliability of elevators, or I should say lack of reliability of elevators, has been really eye-opening for me the last few years. I don't know why they break down so much. It's just a box that does this. But yeah, they're not very reliable.
All right, and I think the other comments here about the access to resident services, the residents all around really appreciated and it seemed like they had good relationships with the resident service staff. And then they also talked about the bus stop that's nearby and then the overall community where they feel really integrated with. There's a park across the street as well.
This addresses some of the other concerns where we saw. To the right is that 4th floor lounge space with a comment about people misusing it. Kind of going from left to right actually here. The photograph of the carpet there is sort of a stained carpet. I mentioned earlier the location of the trash room being kind of at the end. That means the people at the far end have to drag their trash all the way through the building. And a lot of times that's a chore for children, and they're not always terribly careful with things. Maybe even adults not being careful with things results in trash getting dragged on the floor. In this case, we put carpet in. The thought being that carpet can help dampen hallway noise and things like that, but it also will soak up stains. The picture of the elevator there is something that I did mention already. One of the big surprises is the furthest on the left image there, which is the sort of the far end where there's a couple of 3-bedroom units. Because of the way the stair is configured, essentially they're on a short dead-end corridor, which is perfectly legal in Oregon code. But we didn't hear this directly from the residents, but we heard this from the resident services coordinator that some people who live in those on that dead end feel a little unsafe because if there's smoky fire in the corridor, how are they going to get by it? So the code allows it. The fire marshal says it's safe, but the residents don't feel safe. So that was really something that I didn't really ever consider.
All right. So with all these findings, we wanted to go over where we see our opportunities or lessons learned from our study. All right. So Corey mentioned this before, but this is Peggy, the superstar of the POE, because she is the resident services coordinator and really acted as the resident liaison and helped us understand how to best communicate with residents, make sure to advocate for the residents, to not waste their time, and to also make sure that they're fairly compensated, which I'll get into on the next slide. And then this is a snapshot of our schedule where we ended up with the post occupancy evaluation. And there's a lot of steps, and Peggy really had to be there all along the way to help coordinate and schedule these engagement events with residents. All right, so compensation. I think that this is really key. It's making sure that we were acknowledging that we were taking or asking for residents' time and that they were fairly compensated with gift cards. And Peggy also mentioned when we were planning an evening focus group, she told us some words of wisdom that we are going into someone's household at night, and so we better make sure that we're providing dinner for not only the resident participant but also their family. And so that is something that we'll always remember for future studies. Consent. So we had everybody who participated. We ensured that they signed a consent form and that they're also 18 years or older. And then we also wanted to protect privacy or identities of the residents. And so any of the identifying data, such as names or unit numbers, was removed from any of our data prior to being put on our shared server at our office.
I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what we're getting out of this. Design process is both like a linear and a circular kind of thing. Linear because you start with nothing and you end up with a built project at the end, but also circular in like a granular sense because you're constantly like reconsidering and reevaluating and reiterating on ideas. You have an idea, you present that idea, you get feedback, pro or con, and you take it back to your desk and you rework it and you present it again. So there's just this feedback loop. And so we see the post-occupancy evaluation as a way, like on a much bigger scale, that we're getting feedback on our buildings, because otherwise we're not really hearing a lot from our clients sometimes. So we do the design process, we build the building, we do a post-occupancy evaluation, and that helps instruct us on our next project. Ultimately, in the upper left there's owner's project requirements. It's not something that we do, and not a lot of our clients come to us with. But ultimately, we want to get to a position where we have some like a template or a framework for which to kind of describe what our project goals are. A lot of times it's very informal, and so we're looking to a way to perhaps formalize that and then use that when we do a post-occupancy evaluation years down the road to see how we did compared to those requirements. Maggie showed this matrix before where we had done the survey, focus group, operator, building operator workshop, walkthroughs. And in this slide, we've expanded the kind of inclusiveness of what we're doing to include comfort criteria analysis, comparative data analysis, and energy use analysis for our next post-occupancy evaluation, which we recently Maggie was awarded a fellowship through the Energy Trust of Oregon, their Net Zero Fellowship program, where they're going to give us some funding to help offset the costs. But their organization isn't so concerned with, to the residents like their bike room. They're more concerned with energy conservation. Their mandate is to try to bring down energy use across the state. So as part of this next post-occupancy evaluation, we're going to be looking at, and you can probably advance the slide here, but be looking at temperature, humidity, particulates, carbon dioxide, and then also looking at energy use on site. We've already done a little bit of this in the past for a different fellowship, but we're going to really focus on trying to correlate some of the qualitative stuff that we're hearing from residents with quantitative data from a variety of sensors. And then that will feed into a more comprehensive final report. And the project we're doing is the Argyle Gardens, which is in North Portland. It's 60 units, I want to say, of both SROs and studio units. A lot of the SRO, there's 3 buildings of SROs, which you can see here on the right, and then a larger building with the studios in it. And they all have shared kitchens and shared amenities and things like that. And we had just last week had our first initial meeting with building staff. This is a quote from them. It says, "It has been tough to see residents deal with structural issues, neighbors, safety, drugs, crime, behavioral issues. It feels like the residents need to live in unsafe environments and nothing is done about it." The staff, he doesn't have total global control over everything that goes on site, and it was really kind of painful to hear him lament what he was seeing people go through, and it really, hit home with me that they really care, they really want to do right by the residents, and I think that through this study we can help give him some of the tools he needs to understand what's going on, and we can, as architects, do better next time around.
So for a question.
Yes.
Because the bulk of that project is modular.
Yes, that is modular.
Is there a difference in that versus like a stick frame building or sort of more typical construction?
Yeah, the thing that'll be perhaps unique about it
Could you all hear that? Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You probably hear me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. The question, I can hear it very clearly. I don't know what's wrong with you. The question was, because this is modular construction, which I think I mentioned earlier, but it is modular construction, might there be any difference in what we see between this and stick-built construction? I think maybe in terms of the quantitative stuff you're thinking of. I think the only thing I anticipate maybe being different is sound transmission through the units, because instead of maybe a single wall with a STC of 50, which is Oregon code, we've actually got double walls because each unit is built as a unique box and then stacked together. So I'm wondering if sound transmission between the units might be better than we anticipate. But in terms of energy, I think it's pretty, like we did do an analysis of it 2 years ago. It was kind of middling because we didn't go too far above code. But I'm curious about the sound. So that concludes our presentation. Do you have any questions? Yes. Do you want to do the microphone?
Thank you. So I guess I'm wondering, in terms of engaging with residents, how you set expectations with the data that you're gathering in terms of, as an owner operator. Like, we don't always have the ability to make massive changes like moving the stairwell. Like, aside from, I guess, how do you set expectations? And aside from the incentives that you provide, how do you get people to care about the survey that you're doing and engage with you?
One of the things that Peggy advises of, and I want to hear what Maggie has to think about this too, but she said people would be engaged if we came to them with like, hey, we're the architect, we really want to hear from you. We want to hear your lived experience in this building. And that proved to be true. People were pretty willing to participate and give us their time, even though there wasn't much in it for them. There was some compensation, but we didn't promise we were going to change anything or fix anything.
Yeah, I think that part is key, that before any engagement event, whether it be, we had kind of a dinner for the survey, for folks to fill out the survey, and then we also had the focus group, and then we did some other kind of tabling events, and we tried to be very clear that we can't make any promises. It's probably not going to change, and I think everyone understood that and still was pretty eager to give their feedback.
We also framed it like, we're doing another one of these a block away. Let's help us make that one better, because like, who knows, they might move to that one, their friends and family might live in that building. So I think there was a sense of shared community and responsibility in that, which was really cool to see. Yes.
How much interpretation or translation did you have to do?
Do you want to do that?
I'm assuming you have multiple languages. How much translation or interpretation, and what methods do you use to do that?
I believe that we translated the survey Chinese, Vietnamese, and Spanish, and that was provided. That requirement was provided by the resident services staff, and we have a local translation service that we use for that. The surveys were done via Google as well, and so we did an initial translation and then a double check of it. And then for the focus group, for the sign up, we asked if folks would be requiring any interpretive services, and they declined, I believe. So yeah, so that is built into our costs whenever we do engagement. Mm-hmm.
I guess related, you just mentioned cost. So how was this funded? Was it REACH? Was it a grant? And if you're at liberty to say it, like, how much did this cost?
Well, Holst just did it. Yeah, I think it was important enough, and we have a strategic goal through like our leadership group of starting to do more of this sort of thing. So this one we just kind of just went for it and dedicated staff time to it. I think you did the math kind of to figure out how many hours we ended up spending on that. Do you recall?
I think it was around 120 hours.
Yeah, but split up a couple people. You and I, you primarily, some of mine, and then a few other people participated.
Yeah, and we had some flexibility on this as well, where I think the timeline went on much longer than we would typically do for a POE because it kind of fit in with billable project work as well, needed to. But I think, yeah, I think we've been trying to, I think it's an interesting thing trying to put a cost to this because so much of it is engagement, and we want to be able to allow, if every building operator, staff member wants to do a walkthrough with us and wants to talk to us for 2 hours, and we welcome that. And so it's trying to make sure that we collect as much quality data as possible, but also putting parameters around the time piece.
I think part of it too was this is our first time out, so a lot of the procedures and the content was being created from scratch. The next one I expect to take less time. Way in the back. Do you want me to?
It's okay. This is good.
I think at the beginning of the presentation, you guys kind of covered the values when it gets to affordable housing, but I was just curious that in these days, do you see any trends in the affordable market specifically that might be kind of, impacting the design of the architecture? That's might be a little bit different from just regular multifamily design.
I have my thoughts, and
Go for it.
I'll just talk and walk at the same time.
You're like Phil Donahue.
No, I think what I'm seeing, at least on the projects that I'm involved in and through these studies, is the focus on supportive services and affordable housing. So really having the community partners be a part of the programming and design process as well, making sure there's enough case management space in the building. If 24/7 security is needed as well, that's something too that has been brought up a bit in some PSH projects. So I would say that's the biggest trend that I'm seeing or change.
That was basically my answer. A lot more permanent supportive housing with a focus on durability services. We talked about the bike rims and the brake rims. That's happening a lot in Portland, all over the city, and so more focus on durable hardware, better security, more kind of eyes on things.
Soon I will remember that I'm holding this.
I'm a CFO, so I'm going to ask a non-architect question. How do you have this information you ask from management, from residents? How do you aggregate that and bring the cost of this into the picture? So what we have seen is the way the process seems to work now is you go to the architects, you tell them we need to build this building, everybody throws their wish list, and the architects come back with a project that costs $600,000 per unit, and you go, thank you very much. We'll throw that in the trash because we have funding for 400. How do you incorporate the real world realities of financial scarcity into building, making things work?
That's a great question. If anybody has an answer to that, I'd love to hear it. It's very challenging. Do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer. I think there's always solutions that don't have to cost a lot of money. So if you really understand the problem you're trying to solve, not just what you want in the end, but why do you want it, I think there's solutions you can come up with. And I just want to applaud you guys for doing this work, because it's really important. We keep building more and more housing, but we often make the same mistakes over and over. So I think this is great work and has really started me thinking about a lot of things I could try. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll add in terms of the cost conversation is that a lot of what we heard don't have big cost implications. So like the carpet versus LVT and the corridors, or really some of it was related, or a lot of it was related to kind of design thinking in terms of hidden spaces, or really trying to understand the resident perspective and putting that into our design instead of just going about our typical process and kind of our go-to floor plan of how we would approach an affordable housing project. It's kind of a change in thinking a bit.
There were a couple more.
For the fourth floor amenity space that you had, it wasn't occupied very often or used very often, but I'm sure during design you were excited about it, and it was something that you felt was special for this building. Besides that being a bummer, like what did you take away from that you would do differently? And then also, was there any like larger, broader ideas of like, hey, we think this is special, but how do we also make it special for the resident?
Mm-hmm. I think the lesson that I take from it, and also Argyle Gardens, which has had a lot of trouble with the mismatch between the aspirational design thinking at the front end and the reality of folks inhabiting the building. In that building, there's like, because it's SRO, there's a lot of kitchens and bathrooms are all community. When you're sitting at your desk in your nice office space, it's very easy to be like, oh, this will like create a community and it'll be wonderful. I think tempering expectations and understanding that people have conflict and people are dealing with lots of stuff and trauma, and just being a little more careful and thoughtful about that. I think that's maybe a different case than the fourth floor space in this building, because I think that population is a little more better off. I don't know the right word to put it, but like they're not as on the margins. I think in that case it's more about like accessibility. Being on the fourth floor in the corner of the building, probably 2 floors of the building don't even really know it's there, available. So. Yeah, just be realistic about how things are going to be used.
Were you able to give the outcome of the survey to the owner and operator? And did you have list of recommendations? What could be done to solve these resident problems?
Yeah.
As a result of the design?
We have shared the results thus far with REACH, although we haven't had the final report put together, right? Soon. But they've been kind of partners all through this, so they've heard everything that we heard. And then, as I mentioned, we're doing a design for them, a block away for kind of a similar project. So the conversations we're having for the POE really kind of bled into that design process, because those people were some of the same people we were dealing with on this project. So it was really because of that. There was never like okay, here's the report, this is what we think. It was conversational for like a year.
I think you kind of just answered my question, but thanks. I'll go ahead and answer it anyway. So my understanding is that the 72 Foster, that was an initiative that, excuse me, that you guys started, like your architectural firm was just interested in.
Mm-hmm.
The second project, the modular one, that's also under REACH. Did I understand that correctly?
No, that one is run by TPI, Transition Projects Incorporated. So yeah, another affordable housing agency in Portland.
Okay. Well, my question is still relevant though. At least to me, is have you had any interest from, apart from what you just said about REACH, the new building that you're designing for them, this having bled into that, have you generally understood there to be much interest from owners in doing a POE and doing this and like making this work more routinized and taking it forward for a lot of future developments?
Yeah, Maggie, do you want to talk about Central City Concern?
Yeah, we were approached about to put in a proposal for a POE for Central City Concerns. And I know that they are trying to make it a standard part of their development process. And I think for TPI, or the Argyle Gardens project, there's been a lot of bad press about the project, I would say, kind of echoing the residents' concerns and safety concerns on site. And so their executive director was very eager. I believe that we approached them as we wanted to study that project, and he was in full agreement and gave us the green light for that. So yeah, I think overall, I think we've also talked to another client too, where we're working on a permanent supportive housing project for them, and we've talked about kind of next steps for once it's leased up, doing a study there. So yeah, there's definitely interest, but not yet a solid business for Holst.
Well, I was going to ask the question of, having clients, come to us and ask us to do a POE on a building that we didn't design, and how do we feel about that? How do we feel it's a different process? Oh,
I
can't hear you. Sorry.
Yeah.
I know.
You want to give it? I didn't introduce Kim Kripane. She's Business Development Director for Holst, and that's why she's been so forward with questions.
I mean, my question is, so, the two projects we're doing, they're clients of ours, they're projects we've designed. When we're having clients come to us now on projects we didn't design, how do we feel about doing POEs on projects we didn't design and not understand the thought process and the design behind them? And, how do we approach those any differently? Or through a different lens or through a different process? I'm just curious myself.
Yeah. We talked about that. I think what I would want to do is interview the architects and designers and kind of get the download from them. What's that?
What were you thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you could ask the same of us, but I don't know. Central City Concern in that instance did say that architects were on board. That architect just didn't want to do it themselves because of workload issues. So yeah, I don't know how forthright they would be or forthcoming they would be, given that we're a direct competitor in that instance. So I don't know. Do you want me to take it up? I can walk.
Yeah, I was wondering how much community engagement did you guys do upfront with both projects, and maybe present the ideas or the design to potential residents and kind of get their input to try to, prevent issues that could have been foreseen, but.
I wasn't involved with Argyle Gardens, so I don't know that one exactly. But for 72 Foster, that was planned at a time before community engagement was really much of a concern. That was, probably 2016, 17. And Portland has some base requirements in the zoning code that you do engagement, but it's very, I would say, performative. You've already pretty much got the design baked. You've talked to the owner, what they think they need. I'm trying not to speak through both microphones here. So I would say not really authentic engagement in that case, but we're getting better at that. It's, as I mentioned before, it's really challenging because schedule doesn't really usually allow it, but I think owners are getting wise to the value proposition. So we're doing it more on bigger public projects, but still not a ton on affordable housing projects. Some of the developers and owners we work with have already done engagement with the community, like the target demographic for this project. They've engaged with community-based agencies who've talked to their constituents, so we get some feedback that way. But we haven't done a lot of direct engagement on affordable housing yet.
All right, well, I think we're out of time. So thank you all for listening. And yeah, we'll be up here if there's any other questions.